Hi. This is a video about two things basically. Well, one thing really. It's about inflation and how much money you will need in the future to maintain the same purchasing power that you've presently got. Things are changing with pensions in a number of ways. Some of the pension laws have been relaxed, and you don't now have to take an annuity out. Although the rules have changed, the basics are the same. To maintain a standard of living, you need a certain amount of money. The government gives virtually everybody a state pension, and that's circa around about £9,300 a year. That includes the winter allowance and the £10 for Christmas bonus, which thank you very much. That's the basic. Now, if you've got a house and you've paid the mortgage off, or if you're living in somewhere where you're not having to pay rent, then £9,300 starts looking a lot better. But if you're wanting perhaps to go on holiday, perhaps to have more than just the basic standards for things, then £9,300 at the present time isn't a huge amount of money. It's certainly enough to get by on. But if you want more than that, then you're going to need to have an income on top of your state pension. The problem that you've got with that is obviously how to do it, how to get the interest rate to overcome the inflation. So I'll go through this in 2 or 3 steps. And the first thing is what is the inflation rate? What has it been? If you looked at some of the other videos I've put out, one of them is basically from when I started work in 1967. Yeah. Until now, like 2020-ish. And I worked out, based on a few standard things like a pint of beer and a Mars bar and stuff like that, that the inflation rate was round about, on average, 5 to 6%. And let's see what the experts do and what they come out with. And the experts that we're going to use in this case is the Bank of England. Yeah. So we'll go to their website. So this is the Bank of England's website. It's their inflation calculator. And it says what would goods and services costing? If it cost you £1 in 1967, how much is it going to cost you in 2019? I haven't got the figures for 2020 yet. We've got to wait till the end of the year because at the moment we're still in 2020. So that's how much you would need. For every £1 I had in 1967, I would need £18.29 now at the end of 2019. Now that's an average of 5.7% a year. So the Bank of England, with all the technos, all their quants, all their computers, thousands of people taking calculations, measuring things. They've come up with 5.7%, which is within a midgey stick what I came up with, which was approximately 6% using my standard pint of beer in a Mars bar. I mean to say, could we not simplify this a little bit easier? You know? Anyway, you can put this in for any year. So if you put it in for, let's say 1999 till the year 2019, you see that it's only £1.75. And they're saying inflation is 2.8% a year. So for the last 20 years, basically, inflation has been 2.8%. If you've got a rounding error, just let's call it 3%. But there's some big fluctuations. If you look back at the inflation between 1970 and I'll make it 1971 because that was the year I started college, and we'll make it 1981. Let's give it 10 years. You see the inflation is 13.9% there on average per year. 13.9%. If we take it back a couple of years to 1979, not much change. Take it back to 1978, not much change, 13.7. If we went from 1980, and you can mess around with this for 5 minutes, and you can see it's 6.6. So what's basically telling you is that in the 70s, especially the latter parts of the 70s, so if I went from say 75 through to 80, you can see that inflation was 14.4% a year there. And I can remember it at the time because people were requesting £6 a week and £4 a week inflation because it was just going up so much, 14 or 15% a year. That's what inflation was. So they've got fancy calculations and stuff like that. But basically, over the last 30 years, from the government's figures, and there's two different types of figures that they use for inflation, but they're using like the CPI, Consumer Price Index stuff. And that's what the government use to base a lot of payments on for Social Security and for pensions and stuff like that. So if you assume that is somewhere near correct, and personally I don't, I think 3% is way too low when you compare what you're having to pay for things. Take a look at how much you've got to pay for council tax, how much you've got to pay for insurances, how much you're paying for various things. Some things are slightly cheaper, some electrical goods, quality of that. But overall, I think 3% is a real low figure. So that's the first thing. If we take that, it's 3% on average. Now, if we go to this spreadsheet, this spreadsheet is basically, it's got the calendar year, start at the top helps. This is the age inflation. What I've done is I've laid it out with the calendar years, elapsed years, age you're going to reach in this year. So if you were 21 in the year 2020, you'd be 22 in the year 2021. This goes down to the retirement ages as they are at the present time. Retirement ages now for anyone in the 20s is 68. That would be the year 2067. We're on start date times here. If you were retiring at 65, that would be the year 2064. Retiring at 60 would be the year 2059, the year 2054 would allow you to retire at 55. That's 34 years in the future. What I've done is I've worked it on the purchasing power. If you were normally doing a discounted cash flow, what you would do is you would pick a rate, and then you would discount it for the cash flows in the future, and they would come back to you as a lesser amount because your purchasing power would be less. But what I've done is I've flipped that on its head. I've done that the reverse way. The numbers that you're looking at is what money you would need today to have the same purchasing power based on the different inflation rates. I put the purchasing power at the start of the year with £1,000. That's obviously easy enough. If you need £2,000, double it. If you need £5,000, cinque it. 2% went through the banks, the central banks. 2% is their minimum. 3% is the historic from 1990 through to 2020. 4%, 5% to show you the graduations. 6% is the historic inflation rate from when I started work in 67 to the year 20. I've got 2002 here. It's obviously just 2020. I am on Star Trek dates if I'm doing that. And then 7% is an outlier. If you have an inflation rate of 2%, then in a year, your £1,000, you would need 1,020 to have the same purchasing power. In 7 years, you need 15% more. If you've still got £1,000 on average, depending on what you buy, of course, you'll have 15% less purchasing power. 25% less after 12 years. 40% less after 17 years. And by the time 21 years is elapsed, you would need 50% more. You would have lost 50% of your purchasing power. 15% is grey, 25 is the yellow, 40 is the green, 50 is the tan. So you can see on the different rates, if you take the 15%, at 2% in 7 years, you've lost 15% of your purchasing power. On 3%, it only takes you 5 years, 4% 4 years, 5% 3 years, and the 6 and the 7% are so close together, they're just over 2s. But if you go to the 50%, you can see the differences. But what you can see is the curve. And it's basically the higher the inflation rate, and it's just A equals B plus BX. It's just a simple formula, and it just compounds on itself. The bigger the X, the faster you're going to get to these percentages. That's why the government wants to try and maintain it down at the 2%. If you get up to this sort of range, where after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, say 5, 6 years, you need 50% more money, the wheel starts to turn. You start getting into the Venezuela type hyperinflation. Government is shit scared of that. Although that would reduce its debt ever so much, it would tend to destroy the currency. When it's at 2%, they can just about keep the lid on it. People can't see the slicer taking away 2%. You can when it gets to 6 and 7% a year, you'll notice it really, really dramatically. So if we take it down to the years, and we just assume for argument's sake that you would retire when you were 68, I think there's a review around about the mid-30s, 2033, which is when the government, I think, will look at it again, and the possibility is that it'll increase it again to maybe 69 or 70. The reality of the situation is once you get older, especially when you get into your 60s, you may not think it, and you think you're just going to be like this. When you get to 60 or 70, you've just got more numbers, you know. Your age, it's not. You physically slow down. You find it harder to do, for most people, find it harder to do physical things. And there's also a big age discrimination. Once you get older, people just don't want to employ you. Now, it may be different in the year 2067. It depends what happens. It depends on population. It depends on loads of things. It depends on AI. It's impossible to tell. It's just too far in the future. But what you can say is if inflation goes at 2%, then for every £1,000 extra that you would need now to supplement your old age pension, then you would need 2,500. If it's 3%, 4,000. If it's at 6%, which is what it was over the course of my working life, from 67 through till whenever it was, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, whenever, 2015 and whatever. This is, you would need 15 times as much. What that does is it puts the onus on having to be able to beat inflation. If inflation's 2% and your return on investment is 3%, then one, you're keeping pace with inflation, and two, you're building up your assets, possibly. Depending on what you put them into, blah, 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 blah. No guarantees. Only guarantees you get is if you buy bonds. But if you buy bonds, and I'm getting off topic here because that's the investment side, what to do with your money. This is just showing you what inflation does to your money, to highlight that you need to beat inflation. Before you do anything else, you need to beat inflation. And this is just for your money that you've got saved or in assets. Inflation is eating away at anything which is like cash money and stuff like that. That's why the rush to put money into assets. That's why properties went up so much. That's why people are piling into shares. That's why they're buying cryptocurrencies. That's why they're buying gold, because they're just shit scared of inflation in inflated money. Anyway, these are the numbers that you can see from there. Basically, the higher the inflation, the more you need, but it's by a factor. 2%, 2.5 times as much. 6%, 15 times as much. You can see what that 6% has done when it's been compounded through all of the years. Anyway, there's a little chart here. And the chart is basically just showing what the graph would be for the inflations. And as you can see, the first 10, 15 years, there's a difference, but not a huge amount of difference. But as the compounding takes place, then the graphs tend to splay out and the differences get more. The bottom is the band that the Bank of England wants to contain it at. 2%. If it goes to 3 or it falls below 1, if it goes above 3 or falls below 1, the Chancellor writes to the Bank of England, kicks the horses and saying, you need to do something to get this back on track. I want it back to 2. If it's below 1, it's not cutting the debt fast enough. It's not deflating the debt fast enough. If it's above 3, I'm getting worried that we're going to hit high inflation and I'll not be able to control people's expectations or their wage demands. People are going to get severely pissed off. The next one up, with the two dots on the red, that's what it was for 3%. That's what I think is, that's from like 1990 to 2020, where they've managed to print the money, keep the money supply, and they've fiddled the interest rates and they've ratcheted them down to the point now where the Bank of England, what is it, 0.1%. It's as near nothing as you can get. The blue dotty one, that's the inflation over my working life. So every pound, every £1,000, bearing in mind I was only on £360 a year, but for every pound I would need 15 now to buy the same amount of goods and services. Average them out. Historically, inflation will happen. The Chancellor's just told you that he's virtually mandating that it will happen. The question is just which one of these curves you think is more realistic. Will your investments be able to keep pace with inflation? Not only have they got to keep pace with inflation, but they've got to overcome taxation. People tend to forget that. They just look at the rate, they forget how they're getting taxed. Sometimes it may be better to put it in a lower rate of return, which allows you to get a different tax take on it. Similarly, it's better to put it into an ISA, obviously. All income is taxed, and that includes a state pension. At the moment, it's 9,320. That's for the year 2021 tax year. That includes a winter allowance of £200, which is tax-free, yay! And a £10 Christmas bonus, which is also tax-free, yay! So Gordon Brown gave those ones out, but he also sold the gold for about knockdown prices. So he jizzed all that up against the wall, then he handed out a few little freebies for people. Tax allowances, your personal allowance, you get £12,500 tax-free, 2021 tax year. Your investment income, the first 1,000 is tax-free if you're a basic rate taxpayer. So if you're paying tax at like the basic rate, which is like 20%, you get your first £1,000 of bank or building society interest rate tax-free. ISAs, there's no investment interest to pay on them, investment tax, and there's no capital gains tax. If you get a pension lump sum, the first 25% is tax-free, the rest is taxless income. This is how it stands at the moment. The tax for pensions has been changed quite dramatically over the last few years. It was basically Osborne that came in and changed it. Before, you basically had to buy an annuity with your pension. You could take some out tax-free, but you had to basically put the rest of it into an annuity. And these were quite restrictive, and you were restricted on dates, and you were restricted on what you can do. Now it's changed, I would imagine subsequently in the next X number of years we're looking at here, it'll change again. What you need to bear in mind is how you do with your pension. If you put it into a SIP, like a self-invested personal pension, whether you're working for a big company, yay if you are, yay if they are paying the defined benefits, which some of the government people still get, which means that if you finish work, they pay you 80% of your final salary. That gets index linked, click, 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 so it goes up. Those are virtually, extinct in the private sector for lots of people because they're just too expensive. The companies can't afford it. And the investment that are being used to generate, they need 6 or 7% a year to cover the costs to pay out for people. The investments that they're getting, the insurance companies, they're not getting that. They used to invest it in bonds. They don't invest it in bonds anymore. Well, they do some of it, but it's harder for them to get the rate of return. So consequently, they're drifting. They're getting lower quality bonds, or they're moving into equities and stuff like that. They've got these amounts to pay out, and they can't get them from the rates of return which is on display from the government at the present time. That's another thing, though, the investment side of it. Tax is taken off the gross amount of your income or savings after any allowances. So you hold all your money together, you take off your allowances, what's left you get taxed on. That goes from your gross to your net. Inflation then takes money away from the net after you've paid tax and from any capital by reducing the purchasing power of it. If you've got any assets, and your assets tend to drift up in price to keep up with inflation, but the money that you get, your net money that you get after you've been paid, that you're spending it back into the economy, your cars went up, car insurances went up, this has went up, food has went up. Everything has went up by a factor. Some 1%, some 2%, some 10%. All the CPI does is hoe these into a basket and evens them out and says, well, for the average person, it's 2.5% that it's been this last year. Depending on your circs, some people, the inflation rate will be higher, some will be lower. Depends if you have property, you're paying council tax. It just depends. All of these are averages. Anyway, that's just an overview of age inflation purchase power. It's real simple. The higher the inflation rate, the higher, the faster it erodes your purchasing power. Wherever investments you get, you need to keep up with them. Otherwise, it's being eroded. On the flip side of it, you kind of take this can't be the total driver. For some people it is, and it's like pension. It's crazy. You want to take account of it, but to my mind, it shouldn't be the biggest driver and stuff like that. If you want to spend money, I'm not talking about frivolous things and stuff like that, like buying your girlfriend a Lambo or something stupid like that. But if you want to do things with it, you've got no idea what's going to happen in next year's time. Be sensible. It's a balancing act, you know. Some people, we're going to save so that I can retire at 55 or wherever. You know, you scrimp and save and stuff like that. Whereas if you were more realistic, you might have to put it back to 57 or 58 or retire at 60. From my point of view, I think that's far more sensible than just rigidly trying to get wherever year that you retire down. Depends what you're working as, depends on your personal circumstances. It's totally impossible. What you should be trying to do is keep it as flexible as possible, keep it as open as possible. Have these things in mind, for sure. Understand what the game is. But don't be dragged into pension at all cost. But it can affect some of your decisions. Like say if you're offered a job and they are matching your pension contribution, you've got to consider that, because that's like an additional amount of money that you could be getting in your pension. But bear in mind that your pension is a locked box. You can't access it till you get to a certain age. I think it's 55 or 60. I think it's 55 or something now. I'd need to check that. But when you access it, you can get the first 25% off tax-free. Like I said, the rest is taxed as income if you want it in cash, or it's too complicated. It'll change by then. All you need to do is keep pace with what's going on. Keep pace with things. Gently. As long as you're in the middle somewhere. You know? Okay, that's the age inflation chart. The old age pension at the moment is £9,300 approximately. What I've done is I've just went through some of the big things, so like food, £5 a day, to £2,000. Alcohol, a couple of £100. You'd have to buy it at home. Obviously, if you're paying £3 or £4 a pint, you're not going to get very far on that. Council tax, electric, gas, water, telephone, cheapest net that you can get, £250, say. Insurance for your house, a couple of £100. TV tax if you've got it, or Netflix, or Amazon Prime, something like that. Dentist, you have to pay for your dental treatment, most people. A checkup will cost you a thick end of £20 odd easily. If you get any work done, you're talking easily £100. That's £100 for the year. Your 2 checkups will cost you £50. Doesn't give you much room. Optician, £50. So you go to the dentist every 2 or 3 years. That would work out at buying a pair of glasses, £100, £150. Yeah, you maybe get them a little bit cheaper. Holiday, if you were taking one, say £700. It's nothing exceptional, but it's still, you get a reasonable holiday for £700. Clothes, £50 a year. Presents, £50. Meals out, £50. House upkeep, £100. That's if you need any work doing, painting on it, replacement. Replace furnishings, that's the soft furnishings, any electrical goods, TV, washing machine, a cooker, anything that needs replacing, kettle, anything like that, a couple of £100 a year. Car. If you had a car, this is one of the biggest expenses would be car tax. £150 a year. Insurance, if you're older, a couple of £100. Petrol, say £700 if you're driving 5,000 miles a year. 5,000 miles, 100 miles a week. You do a couple of big journeys. Repairs and MOT will cost you £30 or £40. Repairs, if you've got an older car, you've got to be looking tyres over a period of time, exhausts, batteries. Depreciation, if you've got an old car, a couple of £100 a year, it'll be going down. If you've got an old clunker, which is at the bottom of the depreciation band, your depreciation will be nothing. But if you put money away to maintain having a car, then it's the same thing. £250. When you're talking about a car, £10,000, £15,000. That's why older people drive small cars. That's why older people don't have cars. Because if you take the car out of the equation there, that's about £1,600, which is about 20% of that 8,000. Food's about 25%. Obviously, if there's 2 people, all these numbers would come down and you'd be able to halve them. This is just based on a single person. But you can see the big amounts are for food, council tax, holiday if you have one, and car. If you're an older person and you're living on a pension, the easiest way to get around that is to get you out of your car. And that'll save you £1,600 a year. leaves you with just over £1,000 a contingency if you need to do something, if you need to get someone in to do any repairs, if you're not capable of doing them yourself. If you want to have a little bit better holiday or a little bit better food, you'd have to move these numbers around. It's enough to live on. It's not enough to live exceptionally well. Although you can. Lots and lots of people did and do live on the basic pension and stuff like that. But there's lots of things that people on the basic pension don't do. They don't do them because they just physically haven't got the money. That totals there's 8,000, bottom there's £1,000 contingency. You can argue about every one of these numbers and say, oh, well, the water could be 260, the telephone, I can get it £5 cheaper than that, the dentist, stuff like that. But over the course, if you averaged it out over, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years, stuff like that, 1 year, you wouldn't need some of these things. But the next year, if you needed to replace something, might be £200, £300, £400. Like I say, the biggest thing to get shot of is the car. That'll bring the numbers better. The next best thing is to be actually living with someone who's on a pension as well. All of these numbers get reduced. It's obvious. That's what, if you don't have any other form of income coming in, if you're an old age pensioner in the UK. Now, obviously, if you haven't paid your mortgage off, or if you're living in rented accommodation, I haven't shown that. The assumption is that you'll have paid your mortgage off, or the assumption is that you're living in accommodation that you don't have to pay for. Wouldn't that be great? Most people would be living in their own house, or if you're an old age pensioner and you're living in council houses and stuff like that, you get reduced rates and stuff like that, a reduced rent. If you were living privately, there's not a lot of room. There's not a lot of room for manoeuvre. You can, like I say, get shut of your car. Don't go on holiday. Or if you do go on holiday, go on an El Cheapo one where it's a couple of £100, you know, reasonable. But if you go there, you're not going to have a lot of money for spending and stuff like that. Maybe the £700 excessive. Maybe you could get away with £300. You could use the £400 somewhere else. But it's a matter of stacking them up and moving them around. It doesn't give you much money for random travel or doing random things and stuff like that. But by the time you get to 65, you know, maybe you're not going to want to do some of those things. Anyway, that was my basic take on a basic budget for an old age pensioner. This is the website for the Bank of England. This is where I'm getting the 2% from. To keep inflation low and stable, the government sets an inflation target of 2% on there. So that's their inflation target. If inflation's too high, it moves around, blah, blah, blah. It's to set the right prices for people to plan their spending. I disagree with this. To me, this is just a backdoor tax. It's basically saying we're going to skim 2% a year off because we can't fiscally manage the debt. It's as simple as that. To me, I'm not an economist and I'm not employed by the Bank of England, but what they are saying, and if you read the bits and bobs, and there's letters to the Chancellor, because if it falls out with a band between 1 and 3%, then they've got to write a letter and saying, we haven't managed to keep the inflation consumer price index within this band. Read the stuff from the Chancellor. Basically what he says, it's the same to me. If you're below it, I want you to get it back up to 2. And if it's above it, I want you to get it down to 2. So this inflation isn't temporary, it's forever. It's infinity. Inflationinity. It's here forever. And he wants it to be at 2%, so you can skim 2% off and you'll not really notice the difference, and he won't have riots in the streets. That's just me being conspiratorial and stuff like that. Put the stuff on there. That's the Bank of England. Let's see what the others are kind of doing. This is a letter from the Chancellor. I'm not the Chancellor. And he's sending it to Mark Carney, right? And it's they're obliged to send letters to each other, even though the government owns the Bank of England. Blah, blah, blah. Inflation fell to 0.9, triggering an open letter for inflation. If you want to read it, it's in here, but I'll just go to what I consider the pertinent points. I welcome vigilant risk material, ensure inflation remain anchored, and inflation likely to return to the target on a sustainable basis. We must have 2% inflation. That's what he's saying. And then he says, as I have done previously, I can confirm. So they've obviously had to write these letters every month or whatever, or every quarter, whenever they do the figures. I can confirm that the government's commitment to the Bank of England's operational independence. Yeah, like I say, you believe that? I've got a few bridges over the time to sell you. Operational independence and the current regime of flexible inflation targeting remains absolute. Just like Kelvin, minus 273 degrees centigrade, it's absolute. You just can't go any cooler than that. And inflation must be too. The target of 2% CPI, consumer price index inflation, is symmetric. It's symmetric. It's like round. It's the same above as it is below. It's symmetric. Deviations below the target are treated the same way as deviations above the target. I.e., if you're below the whip, you get higher. And if you're above the whip, you get down. As deviations above the target. The institutional structure helps to ensure that inflation expectations remain anchored and that monetary policy can play its role fully. Macroeconomic stability. Commitment to living within our means. We're living within our means, that's why we're borrowing all this money. This is out with the pandemic. They were still borrowing heaps of money. Setting out the objective of returning the public finances to balance as soon as possible in the next Parliament. They haven't been in balance since about the 1700s. It's just total magumba that people are writing. Anyway, I'm copying this letter, blah, 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 blah. Balance as soon as possible. The next point, while creating a space to invest in the economy. So there you have it. Inflation will be mandated and must be 2% as a minimum and as a maximum. This is the website of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. This is the private bank which the US government uses to print money, and basically it's the banker of the United States government. As opposed to the Bank of England, which is wholly owned by the UK government, the Federal Reserve, as I've just mentioned, is private, makes a profit, and it's guaranteed a profit for all of the money that it produces. It gets a seigniorage for producing money, and it's guaranteed that it gets a cut of the money. This is what they are saying. Why does the Federal Reserve aim for inflation of 2% over the longer run? The Federal Open Market Committee judges that inflation of 2% over the longer run is measured by the annual change in the price index for personal consumption is most consistent with the Fed's mandate for. They've got two mandates. This got changed a few years ago. They've now got a mandate for maximum employment and price stability. When households and businesses can reasonably expect inflation to remain, and you'll hear this on the websites for the Bank of England, for the ECB and for the Fed, low and stable. So to their mind, 2% is low, and if you keep it that way, it's stable. Well, I agree with you, if you keep it that way, it's stable, but I disagree with you, the 2% is low. When households and businesses can reasonably expect to remain low and stable, they can make sound decisions regarding saving, borrowing and investment, which contributes to a well-functioning economy. This is from the central bank that is part of the money printing QE to infinity, and the debt in the US is somewhere in the region of 26 to 27 trillion dollars. The debt in the UK is now standing at about 2.1 trillion pounds. So if you gross that up 30%, say $2.5 trillion, American population is about 5 times ours. So if you said 5 times 2.5, rounded off, say $13 trillion on a like-for-like basis. So the Americans have got a national debt twice the amount that we have per head of population. We're at as close as makes no difference. The official figure is 99.5, and I wonder how many nights have been spent trying to get it down or up, or at least so that it's not 100 of GDP. But you have got to be told that running a country is not like running a household budget or your credit card, because you can just print money ad infinitum. Anyway, they're saying for many years inflation has run below the Fed's reserve 2% goal. So understandably, the higher prices, blah, blah, blah. This just goes on, but basically they're singing from exactly the same songbook as the Bank of England. 2%, 2%, 2%. Do you think there's been any collusion? And if not collusion, then why is it 2% that they all agree on? You know, you would think, well, 1.5, somebody else would say 2.5, 2.7. No, it's 2. It's exactly 2. It's got to be 2. It's got to be 2. Incredible 2. It's got to be 2. So that's the Fed. That's the private bank. And you can make money if you own the bank because you're guaranteed. So, website of the ECB. This is the central bank of the Euro countries, and they all hide money into the central bank and they have like basically shares in it commensurate or in line with how much money they've poured into it. In essence, it's Germany and France that basically have the lion's share because they've put the most money in. Obviously, when Britain was in, it had to put money into it as well. And they call it Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices. So they've got a four-letter acronym rather than a 3. Is that inflation? Not too sure. It measures the change over time in the prices of the consumer goods paid by the euro area households. Just the euro area households. So some countries, I think like Denmark and Sweden and some of the Eastern Europe bloc countries are not using the euro, so they don't get their consumer prices monitored. But if they do join it, they will do it. And it says the main task of the ECB is to maintain price stability. I heard that on the Fed, and I heard it on the Bank of England. They're all trying to achieve this price stability. That it defines as an annual inflation rate of below 2% over the medium term. So when I read this a while ago, I'm sure it said just under 2%. So they're wanting theirs to be just below 2% over the medium term. What they say, the reason for aiming it below but close to 2%, inflation rates of below but close to 2% are low enough for the economy to fully reap the benefits of price stability. Wouldn't you think that if prices didn't change, right, that having inflation at 0 would be even more stable? Apparently not. They want to reduce the risks of deflation. Shit, they just don't want you to have anything cheaper. Having such a safety margin against deflation is important because there are limits to how far interest rates can be cut. Well, yeah, you've cut them to 0, and in some places they're negative. So, really, can you say that anymore? In a deflationary environment, money policy may thus not be able to sufficiently stimulate aggregate demand by using its interest rate instrument. It's gone. You cannot use it anymore. It's at 0. Bank of England's rate's 0.1%, like 1/10%. You've used it. So this is just Magumpo. This makes it more difficult for monetary policy to fight deflation. Yeah, we want to fight deflation. Then when you're having any stuff cheaper, poof, deflation. Whoa. Then to fight inflation. Yay, get the prices going up. Commitment to inflation is persistently too high and inflation is persistently too low. So it's just like Little Red Riding Hood with the bears. Like, you know, the first inflation that Little Red Riding Hood had, jings almighty, that's just too low. Inflation was 0. Ugh. And she tried the other one. Oh my goodness, this inflation's 4%. That's no good either. Then she tried the third bowl. Oh, this inflation is it's really nice. It's 2%. Yeah. Anyway, that's me round trip of the central banks, because these are the people that will dictate the monetary policies. They will dictate the interest rates based on trying to maintain this, to my mind, vicious 2%. Should always be 2%. It's no good. Bank of England said it goes below we need you to ramp it up. It's got to get it back up to, because if you don't put it up to 2%, we won't be able to deflate. We won't be able to get rid of the debt that we've got. Okay, that's the tip of central banks ended. Everybody's got their libraries, haven't they? You know what I mean? Like they sit in the library and got loads of books behind them and shit like that. I've got loads of books that just haven't really got like a library setting. So I've put some of me fave books up on the background. You know, you can see the different ones. I thought it was pretty neat. Little things, little names, you know what I mean. Anyway, inflation out, hang 10.